They were always saying, the shark is not working. The shark is not working.
The shark did not work. It never worked, and that single mechanical failure is the reason Jaws became the greatest thriller ever made. 10 facts buried inside the film that invented the summer blockbuster. Stay until the very end, because the bonus is the strangest thing you will ever hear about this production. Fact number 10. Nobody wanted the job. Spielberg was not the first choice to direct Jaws. Dick Richards was originally attached, but was dropped from the project after he repeatedly referred to the shark as a whale in development meetings. John Sturges passed. Spielberg himself initially turned it down, concerned that a thriller about a shark would define his career in a direction he did not want to go. He changed his mind when he realized the technical challenge was unlike anything he had been offered. He was 26 years old and had made exactly one theatrical feature. Universal Pictures handed him the most complicated location shoot in the studio's history. Almost nobody in the building believed it would work. That doubt turned out to be the best fuel he ever had. Fact number 9. The cast was assembled through rejection. Roy Scheider was not the first choice for Chief Brody. Charlton Heston actively lobbied for the role and was furious when Spielberg declined him. Richard Dreyfuss had already turned down the part of Hooper, then watched a rough cut of another film he was convinced would end his career, called Spielberg in a panic and begged to be reconsidered. Robert Shaw was approached for Quint only after Lee Marvin and Sterling Hayden both said no. Marvin famously declined because he preferred going fishing for real rather than pretending on a movie boat. Shaw, known more as a novelist and playwright than a film star, stepped in and delivered one of the most powerful performances ever put on a Hollywood set. The cast that feels completely inevitable was assembled almost entirely through desperation and last-minute phone calls. Fact number 8. The open ocean nearly killed the production. Most studios would have built a tank. Spielberg shot in the Atlantic Ocean off Martha's Vineyard, and the decision nearly destroyed everything. Boats drifted between takes. Currents shifted carefully staged scenes out of position. The Orca, the vessel at the center of the film's third act, took on water during filming on multiple occasions. On one particularly serious day, the boat began to genuinely sink with Scheider, Dreyfuss, and Shaw all on board. The actors held on to equipment while crew radioed for help from shore. Spielberg later said that if he had understood what open ocean shooting actually involved, he would have built the tank immediately. The fear you see on those actors' faces during the water sequences is not entirely performance. Several of those days, they were genuinely afraid. Fact number 7. Spielberg thought the score was a joke. When John Williams sat down at a piano and played Spielberg the two-note Jaws theme, Spielberg laughed. He genuinely believed his composer was pulling his leg. The most primitive musical idea imaginable, two alternating notes slowly accelerating, and the director of the film could not believe it was being offered seriously. Williams convinced him it was not a joke. He explained that the theme was designed to represent something primal and ancient, the oldest fear a human being is capable of feeling. That two-note motif won the Academy Award for Best Original Score and became one of the most recognized pieces of music in the history of cinema. It has been used to prank people in swimming pools for 50 consecutive years. Spielberg has admitted he was completely and totally wrong. Fact number 6. The Indianapolis monologue took 3 writers to build. The Indianapolis monologue, where Quint describes in quiet, devastating detail what happened to the sailors who survived the sinking and then faced the sharks, is considered one of the greatest pieces of acting in film history. Almost nobody knows it took 3 separate writers to build it into what you see on screen. Howard Sackler, brought in to rework the script before filming, first proposed using the Indianapolis disaster and wrote an initial draft. Spielberg then passed it to screenwriter John Milius, who expanded it into a brilliant but unfilmable 10-page soliloquy. Finally, Robert Shaw, who was an accomplished novelist and playwright, took all of that material, cut it down, shaped it, and delivered it in the form you know. What you are watching is a playwright performing a character built from the work of 3 writers, playing a man who has carried something unspeakable for 30 years and finally sets it down on a table in front of 2 strangers. Fact number 5. The studio had already given up. By the time filming wrapped, Universal Pictures had privately concluded that Jaws was going to be a catastrophic failure. The production ran nearly double over schedule. The budget had tripled from $4 million to $9 million. Executives who watched rough cuts used words like unfocused and unredeemable in private memos. One suggestion raised in a private meeting was to quietly release the film directly to television to limit the financial damage. The film opened on June 20, 1975 across 464 theaters simultaneously, which was an unprecedented distribution strategy that no studio had ever attempted at that scale. By the end of opening weekend, it had broken every box office record the studio had ever set. It went on to gross over $470 million worldwide. The film Universal was prepared to change the entire economic model of the movie industry forever. Fact number 4. The most famous line was never written.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
You're going to need a bigger boat. The most quoted sentence in the history of the blockbuster was not in any version of the script. Roy Scheider improvised it during the scene where he first sees the shark and backs slowly through the cabin doorway, his face moving from concentration to something resembling pure animal dread. The line had actually started as a running joke among the crew during the difficult production. Whenever something went wrong on set, crew members would sarcastically tell the producers they were going to need a bigger boat. Scheider worked the phrase into a take and Spielberg kept it without hesitation. That unscripted, accidental sentence became the template for a kind of perfectly timed understatement that Hollywood has been trying to replicate for 50 years. Fact number 3, the author came to regret his own book. Peter Benchley wrote the novel Jaws was adapted from and was initially furious with what Spielberg did to it. The book contained organized crime subplots, a love affair between Hooper and Brody's wife, and considerably darker characterizations throughout. Spielberg stripped almost all of it away. Benchley believed the film had turned serious material into popcorn entertainment and said so openly. He later changed his position entirely. Benchley spent the remaining decades of his life as a passionate ocean conservationist, and he repeatedly stated that the film had caused lasting damage to how the public understood sharks. Great white shark populations suffered dramatic declines in the years following the film's release, driven in part by a wave of fear-fueled hunting. Benchley later said that if he had known then what he came to know about shark behavior and their declining numbers, he could not have written the book in good conscience. He spent the rest of his life trying to undo what his most successful work had done. Fact number 2, Spielberg never went back to the ocean. After production wrapped, Spielberg developed a genuine and persistent fear of the ocean that he has spoken about across 5 decades of interviews. The man who made the most terrifying water film ever made spent months in open water watching boats malfunction, watching equipment fail, watching carefully planned sequences dissolve in the current. He came away with a lasting unease about deep water that has never fully left him. He has said in interviews that he prefers pools. The director, who taught an entire generation to be afraid of the ocean, shares that fear with them. He built it, and then it got into him too, and it never came out. Spielberg has also publicly expressed regret that the film inadvertently encouraged a surge in shark hunting that he never intended or anticipated. Fact number 1, the broken shark saved the movie. The mechanical shark, nicknamed Bruce after Spielberg's entertainment lawyer Bruce Raymer, arrived on location and immediately stopped functioning. The saltwater environment destroyed the pneumatic systems. The hydraulics failed. The 3 full-sized animatronic sharks built for the production had never been tested in saltwater before filming began. Once in the ocean, they broke down constantly. For the first several weeks of production, the film had no working monster. Spielberg was forced to hide the shark rather than show it. A yellow barrel skimming the surface. A low camera cutting through the waterline. John Williams' 2 notes climbing underneath the silence. The shark you fear in Jaws appears for less than 4 minutes across the entire film. And that is the reason it still works. The imagination fills in what the camera withholds, and the imagination will always conjure something worse than any prop ever could. The mechanical failure that nearly shut the production down transformed a monster movie into a psychological thriller. Everything that followed, the box office records the summer blockbuster era, the revolution in how Hollywood releases and markets films, all of it grew from a shark that could not swim. Bonus fact, the ocean scene that was shot in a backyard swimming pool. We saved the strangest one for last. One of the most frightening shots in Jaws, the moment a severed head suddenly drops out of a hole in a sunken boat, was not filmed in the ocean. It was not filmed in a studio tank. It was filmed in the backyard swimming pool of editor Verna Fields at her home in Reseda, California. Spielberg was unhappy with the original underwater shot and needed to reshoot it. Building a proper underwater set was expensive and time-consuming. Fields solved the problem by filling her home swimming pool with water and pouring in an entire gallon of milk to cloud the water and replicate the murky, dark look of the ocean floor. The shot was rigged, filmed, and cut into the final print. It worked perfectly. The scene that still makes audiences jump 50 years later was assembled in a suburban backyard with a household budget and a jug of milk. Nobody knew. Nobody could tell. And that is perhaps the greatest tribute to what Verna Fields, who won the Academy Award for editing this film, actually contributed to making Jaws the masterpiece it became. Jaws is not just a movie. It is a perfect accident built out of a broken, proper panicking director, a cast assembled through rejection, and a studio that had already privately given up on it. Somehow, all of that chaos produced something that still makes people hesitate at the edge of the water 50 years later. Thank you for watching this episode of Sitcom Secrets. Please like this video and subscribe for more untold stories from the films and shows you love.